Today, we're talking about term finance. Term finance is a fixed rate, fixed term borrowing and lending platform that allows you to borrow against your DeFi collateral for a fixed term at a fixed interest rate. Now, why is this interesting? Great question, but I'm sure you already know the answer. When you have a variable interest rate, which most borrowing and lending platforms do have, you are subject to pain during things like black swans or high utilization timelines. So when there is a lot of demand on a borrowed asset, the interest rate on variable interest rate markets goes way up, and that can make your DeFi strategies net negative or can even liquidate you if your debt increases fast enough to hit your liquidation LTV. So Term avoids that entirely by having a fixed interest rate that will not change for a fixed amount of time. Now, you can see here that the loan terms range from 2 weeks all the way to 26 weeks, but by and large, the vast majority of them are 4-week terms. You can borrow either USDC or wrapped ETH against your collateral, and collateral ranges from LRTs and LSTs to exotic stablecoins and blue chip assets like wrapped Bitcoin and Solana. So let's look at a wrapped staked ETH market to get a better feel for what's going on here. When we click wrapped staked ETH and 4-week terms, you can see that there are two live markets, both closing in 2 hours. Now, when a market closes, it means no one can participate in it anymore, and then the market will settle and the borrowers and lenders will be matched, and in 4 weeks, everything will go back, right? So there are live markets, they close, and they run roughly every 7 days. Here you can see these ones close today, the next one's closed in 7 days, the next one's closed in 14 days, and a bunch of them have closed in the past. Historically, when borrowing ETH against wrapped staked ETH, they have closed at around 2.25% interest rate, which is a really nice interest rate for borrowing ETH against wrapped staked ETH. You can see here 2.25, 2.25, 2.25. If you go back, you will find some 2.5, so do keep that in mind. Let's look at what participating in one of these markets feels like. So here, borrowing ETH against wrapped staked ETH, click participate. And what you'll see first is the ability to lend to the market. So let's just say you want to lend ETH because, if you didn't know, there are points on terms, or at least the capacity to qualify for something in the future. And lenders do get more points than borrowers. So if you want to really rack up the term points, you thought this was an interesting and novel platform, you would want to be lending. So let's just say you do want to lend here. You're willing to lend, let's say I have 3 ETH in my wallet. I could lend 3 ETH at a minimum interest rate. Now, it's really important that you give your actual minimum interest rate that you're interested in lending at. You can see here the last market settled at 2.25%, which was 50 bips higher than Aave's supply rate. So you will be getting paid 50 bips higher, 0.5% more than on Aave if it settles at 2.25, and historically it has. So that's great. So let's just say 2.25. Now, if you said that, you know what, I'm fine getting paid 2%. Well, cool. You would still get paid whatever the market closes at, which is probably going to be 2.25. So if you say you're willing to get paid 2%, but it closes at 2.25%, you will still get paid 2.25% because that is just the interest rate that this market has closed at. Conversely, if you say, well, I'm only willing to get paid 10% on my ETH, and the market closes below 10%, you're just going to get your lent ETH back. And you're not going to be participating in that market, which is fine. It's better than having it locked and not getting paid. So very simple. Once you submit your rate, you can wrap it, approve it, and submit it. And when the market closes, you will know whether or not you are participating in that term. All right, now if you want to borrow, which I think a lot of people are probably more interested in, just submit however much collateral you want. So 10 wrapped staked ETH here as an example. You want to borrow 8 ETH against that. Then instead of a minimum interest rate, you're going to put a maximum interest rate that you're willing to borrow at. Now we did see some 2.5s. So maybe you're thinking, well, I don't know. I really want to participate in this market. I'm fine with 2.5. It's just a little bit more than Aave, but really I want less than Aave. I'm going to put 2.35. So if you put 2.35 because you want it to be lower than Aave, but really want to make sure you get in there, then what will happen is if it settles at 2.25, just like with the lending, you will get the rate of 2.25. So you'll get a better interest rate for borrowing. And if you put below that, like if you put 1%, you say, I only want to borrow 1%, and it settles at 2.25%, you'll just get your collateral back and you won't be participating in that market. Okay, now there is one thing to remember here, that term does have a spread. A spread is kind of like a fee that of like 25 bips when borrowing ETH or 50 bips when borrowing stablecoins. So if you're borrowing at 2.25%, your effective interest rate is 2.5%. Now, if you look at Aave, there's an even bigger spread. So it is, I guess, technically a better spread on term, but I just want you to keep that in mind so you know what's going on. It's like 25 bips annualized for borrowing ETH and 50 bips annualized for borrowing stablecoins. But how do these markets settle is the real question. How do you know what's going to happen? Well, you really don't, which is why looking at historical data is the best thing to do. Now, let me show you sort of how this works. Here you can see this is a simulation where we have a bunch of ETH borrow rates and a bunch of ETH supply rates and how much volume is willing to participate at those levels. So if we look at the borrow rate of 2.8% for this simulated market, you can see there's $44 million willing to borrow at 2.8%. Okay, fantastic. But as the borrow rate goes down, the demand increases. So at 2.5%, there's now 50 million. And then at all the way at 1.6%, there's 200 million. So a lot of people would love to borrow at 1.6%. However, at 1.6%, there is only $27 million of ETH that is willing to be supplied. So the max that you can match is $27 million because that is the total amount that would be supplied at that rate. So you want to find the intersection of these two curves or these two lines. And that you can see is around $100 million and 2.3%. So what will happen is on the back end, Term will calculate all of the bids and all of the asks and say, okay, well, what is the max volume we can settle in this market at what rate? And so you can see here for this one, the maximized volume would be $100 million at a rate of 2.3%. Anything more than that, you get lower matched volume. Anything above that, you get lower matched volume. So that's the way a term works in the back end. It's really cool. So one of the things you're probably asking is, okay, cool. I understand how this works. I sort of get how to open a position, but what about when the terms are over? What happens? Great question. You have 24 hours to close your position before you effectively get liquidated or take a fee and kicked out of the position. So do keep that in mind. After the term ends, you'll have 24 hours to pay back your loan. It's a fixed term loan. So just like in real life, you do have to pay it back or you will take a hit. Now, if you want to roll over your position, that is totally possible and really easy to do. And I do recommend that for anyone who wants to take out a longer term position. So here you can see a bunch of these positions that we have. And let's just say I want to extend my wrapped ETH loan against wrapped staked ETH, which ends in, let's see, maturity September 19th. So this ends in, I have to pay it back in 8 days. Let's just say, well, you know what? I don't want to do that. I want to extend this. I know that I like this position. It's a good interest rate. I want to be in this for longer. What you'll do is click on this little hamburger menu. You can either repay it now, totally fine, or you can elect rollover. So electing rollover says, how much debt do you have? Well, I have 10.14 ETH debt. I'll click max here. And then what percent are you willing to roll over at? You know, currently it's at 2.25%. Let's say I'm fine rolling over at 2.25%, but I really want this to roll over. So you know what, even if it goes to 2.5%, I still would rather roll over than have to pay this back because I'm doing some really interesting stuff with that ETH and DeFi and I want to keep those positions open. You can definitely do that. So it's very simple to roll over. And if you do want a longer term position, that's what I would recommend. Finally, one thing you should note is that currently, because you're participating in fixed term loans, looping is kind of impossible, right? Because you can't borrow and then add that as collateral to the same term. But in term V2, this problem is going to be solved where you can effectively have margin accounts and open up a already leveraged position on something like wrapped staked ETH or wrapped EtherFi ETH, all with one click and one loan. So that's really exciting. Looking forward to that in term V2. But in the meantime, if you wanted to loop and leverage, you'd have to do that sort of weekly rather than all at once. I guess finally times 2. If you want to see sort of how points work and speculate on the additional APRs and percentages you might get, you can look at all of that in the rewards section. And I guess even more finally, if you're worried about security, DeFi Safety has a report on term finance and they gave them a score of 93%, which is a really good score for DeFi Safety. So go and check that out. If you're interested, it's worth reading. You should always look at the security and safety of the protocols you interact interact with, look at their audits, know who their auditors are, check out DeFi Safety, even D.Fi sometimes has some good reports on this, just to get a good feel for what you are participating in. Now, I do want to say this is a sponsored video by Term Finance. So this is just educational content that they have sponsored me to make. And I hope you enjoyed it. I do hope that you learned something about Term Finance. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful rest of your